we do the floors from kind of a start to finish. We have sourced all of our materials from within about quarter to half mile from our property, so everything is right here for us, which is really nice. So let's go inside and we'll show you kind of how the floor looks before we even have the sand put to start leveling. You can kind of see what it looks like after we've got a large area laid, and then we've got some bricks over here that have cured and are ready to be put down. And then this is the kind of before we put any of the sand down to level it, before anything's been done. So we've cleared the excess rock that was in this area, get that out of the way, and we've got some sand outside, so we will dump this and get a load of sand and the floor to be level. We don't want to have any ups and downs or weird spots. So how we do that is we use a laser level, and we set that and we set that to make this conduit piping over here so that everything will be level. And what we do is we get the sand and we bring it in, and then Kevin uses a 2x4 and he drags it along the top of these pipes which are completely level, and then as he goes, he knows that everything is going to be the same height. And these 3-bar pins kind of just hold the pipe in place, and he moves as it goes. And so those are all set, the level's set, so we are ready to pour sand.
Killer, you working? All right. I think that this is a fairly good representation of what the floor is going to look like when it's all done. So we laid the floor, and then we actually got sand and Portland cement and made a dry mix, and we swept it and kind of tamped on top of the block, swept in the joints, and then after that we tamped on top of the block with just actually that hand tamper right there. And used that plywood as a buffer as we were tamping, so it didn't actually damage the blocks. But once we did that, then we wet it down, activated the Portland, and that's kind of the finished product. So we have the house down here on the low spot on the property, and we're trenching to go up to that hilltop there, which I think is about 25 or 30 feet above the house. The idea is to have the solar well fill our tank. The tank will sit up on the hill and it'll actually gravity feed the house. It's not going to be a ton of pressure. I haven't decided if we're actually going to do a pressure pump as well, or maybe just do a bigger flow of water and less pressure, but we'll figure that out when the time comes. This is also my setup for our solar panels. It's designed to actually track the sun during the day. I don't know how necessary that is, but just something I did. And then the seasons, you can actually change the angle on it as well. Our solar well is over on the other side of the property. I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of through the trees there. You can see the panel right there. And that will actually, we'll have this black pipe over there, 1-inch pipe that will run all the way to the tank, which is over here, and then the gravity will actually feed the house, and basically through this trench all the way down to the house. This might be of interest to some, but the tractor I have is actually doing, I guess you'd call it a tractor share with my neighbor, who's a longtime friend. I work with him as well. But we found this backhoe attachment for I think $300 or $500. And what we did, we actually put some quick connects off of the Gannon, which is this right here, the Gannon control valves. And so what we do when we want to use the backhoe, we back up, we actually just chain it to the back on the Gannon, and then that provides a lot of stability. And then hook those quick connects up, and it does pretty good. I mean, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but for $500, I don't think you can beat it. We probably have a little more than that because we had to get the fittings and replace some hoses, but actually all functions pretty well. We have our water tank up there on the hill. I think it's about 20 or 30 feet above the house. And our hopes are to actually have that fill with the solar pump and then feed the house, which is right here. I expect maybe 15 pounds of pressure, but if that's the case, we're using actually 3/4 inch plumbing lines, so I think the volume with that low pressure should be fine. Here's the door we built. Obviously it's not finished. Let it sit and let that newer looking wood age a little bit, but our neighbor actually suggested just kind of torching it and giving it a burnt look, which we may end up doing, and then put a sealer on. I also am thinking about cutting in a peek hole, so when people actually come to the door, you can open it up and look out there. I made it a lot wider than a standard door. Had to build kind of a steel frame and put some really heavy duty hinges on it, which I got as a steel supply place. And then the door's anchored right here, and those probably go in a foot into the rammed earth wall, and then I used concrete epoxy to epoxy them in, and it seems to be plenty strong enough to actually hold the door, which that baby's pretty heavy. But pretty happy with how it turned out. Again, I don't have much in materials in that, whereas if we would have bought a door, it would have cost a lot of money. Here is an example of how we did the structural headers over the windows. So I rammed the walls first and then notched into the wall, which was not the easiest task. And we cast these in forms and put some rebar in to where we could hook them with the tractor and actually set them in place. And then once they were set, I just came back with kind of a grout mix, fairly dry mix, and just jammed it in there. And then on top of that, the bond beam actually is run continuously all the way around. And that, I think, provides for pretty good structure and support. Another thing I wanted to point out was our foundation. I don't know if I've mentioned it in the other videos, I don't think I have, but this structure was actually an afterthought. The idea initially was to build a little garden shed and then get a feel for how to ram and get our mix right. And we started out with those walls in the background over there, basically that corner, and about 3 walls in, I suggested to my wife, kind of jokingly but half serious, that we should just build a little guest house, live in it, then build our main house. And long story short, I was able to convince her. But because of that, and because we were just building a little garden shed, I didn't put a concrete foundation under it. What I did was what's called a rubble trench foundation, and if you've ever done any research on that, you'll see that actually Frank Lloyd Wright, who is a very famous architect, used to use that method all the time. And it's supposedly very strong. I think that it actually may be a little better in seismic zones because that rock can act as kind of a ball bearing on itself if we ever do get earthquakes around this area, and absorb a lot of that movement. So basically these walls are built directly on top of rubble, nothing else. And I'm glad I did it. And I think in the other house, when we build the main house, we are going to do a rubble trench, but then we'll put a bond beam on top of that rubble trench, and then we'll ram right on top of that bond beam. Mainly because it just makes it a little easier for form setup. It's a little neater, I think. Looks a little cleaner. Kind of easier to control. All that good stuff. But these walls have been up for starting over in that corner, about a year. And I have not noticed one bit of settling. It may happen down the road, and I'll let you guys know, but we've had some torrential downpours with the walls exposed and, you know, hitting the bases and, you know, soaking the ground, and I haven't noticed a bit of settling in the walls. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope that it continues to be that way. Here's our bond beam headers that we actually cast in place. This one we actually cast in place. The concrete is made out of the rock that we had from our land and Portland cement and sand. You can see consolidation in some areas was an issue. There's some things I would do different, but it's super strong. I think that the concrete probably hardened better than a standard 3000 mix that you would get off a truck. Here's kind of a little test area we did of the lime based plaster, just natural plaster. We're using the sand locally here and mixing lime in. And I kind of like it. That would be just the rough coat, the scratch coat, so there would be another smoother coat that would go over it. And if we do paint, we're going to make a lime-based paint. One of the big advantages of rammed earth is its ability to actually absorb moisture and to release moisture. And here in the Southwest, it's important because of the fact that we actually weren't planning on living in this structure when we initially started. It's not oriented exactly to the south, so you can see pretty much midday and beyond, this wall starts to get some decent sun on it. It's pretty late in the evening right now, and we have a 2-foot overhang, and the sun right now is pretty low in the sky, so it doesn't get a ton of sun midday, but in the evenings it does get hot, and that sun just bakes these walls. So I think to help with our solar design, we're going to have to probably create some shade for this western wall and then this kind of northwestern wall. This is the first wall that we actually rammed. And ironically, I think that it turned out to be one of our best walls, which doesn't make any sense. It was our first, but I just like the different layers. I didn't do this all in one day, and you can see that in these layer marks here. So this area right here would be where I stopped and then started again the next day. And when you do that, the material kind of dries out too quickly and it doesn't set up, so you get kind of this flaky joint. Nothing structurally to worry about because it only goes in about an inch and then it, gets real hard, but aesthetically it's not the best. Down here I actually initially started out with some different dyes and stuff, just seeing what would happen, and you can actually see the little dots of red and stuff in there, and I came to the conclusion that it wasn't worth it, so we just went with the natural look of of the earth. You can see right here where I filled in with the block instead of rammed earth. It was just a little easier to do that. We're going to plaster the whole thing anyway, so it really doesn't matter what it is. It's not the prettiest block work, but who cares? It's going to get covered up.